Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Cittadini. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at GreatVines. Today, I'm going to talk about implementation, adoption, and change management. So everything really starts with phases of success. So we're going to cover a couple topics today. First one being solution design and implementation, okay? Digging into that implementation process. Change management, critical aspect of implementation. So we'll dig into that. And then we'll look at building the change strategy and some ideas around building strategy for change management. So I'd like to start off with what happens in implementation, okay? So in so many cases, software solutions fail. So I've been in implementation for over 15 years, and I've seen all sorts of things happen as I've sort of moved through my career. And here's kind of a list of some of the top ones, okay? So really to start off, a lack of executive sponsorship and adoption by the company. This is a critical area, okay? So very important to have your executives on board, really providing support to the organization so those end users actually can adopt. This notion that believing software will solve your problems when software is just really a tool or enabler, okay? And this happens a lot where there's really there's an absence of strategy, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Not defining clear objectives, okay? So not having that alignment within the organization, poor planning or project management. This happens quite honestly very frequently, where a project management role isn't necessarily identified, or someone is potentially put into a project management role without the support or skills to manage the project. Insufficient training and support. So critical to make sure that the training is there for all different facets of your organization, and making sure that you're adapting to different training styles. Sometimes it's just about really being too ambitious to start. So GreatVines, we have all sorts of modules. There's so many things that you can do with our tool. But starting off slowly in many cases is a good way to start, getting adoption early by not giving too much too quickly. Not getting buy-in from employees ahead of time. This is central to change management, okay? So we'll dig into that. And then also not handling or dealing with scope issues the right way, okay? So a lot of times as you move through implementation, you identify new areas and new things that you need. So having a plan in place and really working with your provider to do that is important. So for us at GreatVines, it really starts, this really represents the phases of our projects, okay? Everything for us starts off with a solutions conversation. So some of that may start actually in the sales cycle, but we as an implementation team want to make sure that we have a good high-level understanding of what's happening and why the organization is actually bringing us in, okay? And so it starts with some very key areas. So defining success criteria. What is success criteria for the organization? What's the KPIs? What are the measurements they're looking for? And in that, it's really about those business drivers, okay? And then what are those business use cases that support the business drivers? So as you can see, we're sort of like building down. And then lastly, and central to everything, is defining the end user experience, making sure that what you're putting into place can be adopted, can be understood, is reasonable. So solutions is the first thing that happens with us, and we have a process to take our clients through that. And then we move into gathering requirements, and that's where you're really kind of configuring screens and figuring out, how to configure the tool to meet those business drivers and success criteria. And then we do configuration. We also do it for analytics and ETL, and then move into super user acceptance training, and then right into end user training. So I won't dive too much into those roles here, but we do that when we meet with clients. So for us, we think it is critical that our clients identify a super user or super users, depending on the size of the client, to really help shepherd that implementation through, and then also to be a point person ongoing for the solution, okay? So what are the characteristics of super users? They stand out from the rest of your team, okay? These are folks that can juggle many things, spin many plates. They're technically inquisitive. They're not daunted by new technology. They like to work through things. They're someone that's calm and patient and can work, you know, with a lot of different groups successfully. They can navigate a lot of internal politics. Very, very positive people. They know how to communicate, right? They know how to talk to management. They know how to work with help desk tickets and being able to kind of work across the organization. They, in essence, have a really good rapport with the team, and they're friendly folks, okay? And as I say here, lastly, they have grit, okay? These are people that can stretch when they need to stretch, and be able to communicate effectively along the way. So the other role that is critical, and really depending on the size of your organization, we love that you have a designated administrator, okay? So your GreatVines administrator is really what we say is the hub of all things, okay? They provide back-end system support, okay? So they're probably a little more technical than your super user. They're the liaison between the customer success team and the company, okay? So they're working very closely with our success team to troubleshoot issues if they have questions, but they're also that point of contact internally for your end users. They understand tools and capabilities, okay? So they have a pretty deep understanding of how our system works. And again, they minimize dependency on GreatVines support by handling some configuration changes, handling key accounts, working with data loading. They're also the ones that typically manage the surveys and survey plan management and any of the staff system updates. So kind of your real administrator work. So these two roles we find absolutely imperative to a successful implementation. Change management, so largely missed in so many organizations. It is not exclusive to small companies. You see this also from time to time as larger companies as well. It is critical to prepare for change in the organization. So this is based on what is called an ADKAR model, which is sort of a classic change management methodology. And it really goes to demonstrate that there are stages of change, right? Change can't happen immediately. It won't be adopted internally. So you have to really build the right building blocks to get your company up and going on the change that you're putting in place. So it really starts with a launch, okay? A launch a lot of times happens even before an implementation has kicked off, okay? So you're kind of letting people know that change is happening. An all-hands meeting where it's coming from senior executives so people understand and can connect to the reason and why we're putting in that change. Posters, newsletters, emails, funny videos, whatever you need to do to get attention in your organization really starts with a launch. And then the next step is really buy-in, okay? So now you've sort of given people a high-level view that change is coming, but now you want to dig in a little bit more, talking more about what it actually means. So do a true kickoff event. And that typically aligns with the start of the implementation. Demo as much as you can of the product. Now, in some cases, that might be screenshots. Give project updates. So this is really where you want to use the super user, that super user is able to go to team huddles and team meetings, be able to send out an email, being able to walk around the floor and let people know things are coming. And then having the right role assignment. One of the things that people get very concerned about is, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my job every day? So the earlier you can get in front of that, the early people are more receptive to taking in the change. And then you move into understanding, okay? So this is where the super users really get into high gear. You're doing your end user training, you're building your training materials. So people have that. That end user training needs to appeal to a lot of different learning styles, right? So you have to think about how to implement that in your organization. Now, in some cases, it's facilitated training. In some cases, it might be pop quizzes, really whatever you need to do to get people on board. And then comprehension is more of the ongoing, okay? So this is really where you've now launched and you're working away and you're looking at assessing sort of employees, seeing where people are, identify skill gaps, right? Using a skills matrix, understanding where people need ongoing training. So creating the right support mechanisms. And then lastly, it's sort of steady state, right? Retraining. Making sure that people, if they need refreshers, that they're there. New hire training process. Making sure your onboarding plan accounts for any of the new changes. And then finally, a feedback loop. Okay, so now you're moving sort of out of change and into acceptance and operationalizing what you brought to the organization. Planning for transformation. So this is really the starting point, and this is where the senior leadership team and that project team and your vendor, in this case GreatVines, need to be aligned. Okay, so it's understanding how big is this change for the organization, looking at it department to department. How many people will be affected? Okay, how much change is already going on? So that is a classic one that's missed. There could be all sorts of other things that are happening in the organization that can create a challenge for adoption. And then what type of resistance can be expected? This is massive. And we'll talk about some strategies here in a minute to deal with resistance. But inevitably, no matter what the change is, human behavior is to resist. So you will see passive and active resistance that needs to be managed and dealt with. Okay. What are the strategic goals the organization is trying to achieve? We talked about this earlier in the scoping session, but really making sure that you're aligned there. We talked about sort of what are the things that are also happening in the organization. And what tools does the leadership team need to have to ensure the change occurs? So that's something that's commonly missed as well, making sure that management and leadership knows what they need to be doing to be able to create successful adoption. So it starts with messaging. Communication is everything, like clear messaging obviously wins. So communication and communication planning. What is said, when it is said, how it is said, wording and language. Making sure that your project team and your leadership team are using the same language to talk about why change is being brought in. People look for gaps and inconsistencies there. It's really important to be aligned. Analysis of audience, right, and key messages and timing. So make sure you know your audience. In some cases, you have to calibrate for different audiences. And then really critical to that is how does information cascade through the organization? So if there are gaps with the way information gets out to the organization, what tends to happen are narratives start, negative narratives more time than not. So you want to get in front of those and make sure you've got the right communication plan. Ongoing communication streams are really important. Again, I mentioned this earlier, use your super users for updates, visiting team meetings, being accessible to people. Transparency is everything. Celebrate the wins. X group trained this week and did a fantastic job. We've got 2 new super users. We're 5 days from go live. Applaud that. There's a lot of work and change, but also acknowledge the setbacks, right? Projects are hard, things happen. So the more honest you are with those, the more people feel comfortable that the change is happening and it's being controlled. And one that I think is incredibly important that I've used over the years is making sure that you have established open door support hours. So making sure that your staff has a place to come in, and so sometimes super users could block like a couple hours each week and be in a conference room and just be available. And if you have a remote group, where a lot of our clients have remote people that are on the road, that they have the ability to call into a conference line if they have questions. And that's really helping encourage ongoing adoption once things have gone live. Understanding resistance, as I mentioned, really big part of this, okay? Part of this really is about understanding what are the issues underneath resistance. So one of the commons one is fear of job loss. People get so nervous that potentially something may replace them, or it might be an organizational change. Get in front of that early. Make people feel comfortable around that they're still important people and they're just going to be using new software. Lack of awareness of why the change was being made. Okay, so this gets back to that inconsistency with our messaging. So imperative that messaging is crisp. Impact on current job role. So another thing to get in front of right away. If something's going to change, let people know how their job will change. In many cases, it'll change for the better, but people don't understand that, right? So that's something that we need to be very transparent on. Organizations' past performance with change. This can really rattle people, right? And this can create a lot of PTSD for folks that have gone through change before. It's okay to acknowledge the past. It is okay to acknowledge where things have gone wrong before. So talk about it. Lack of visible support and commitment from managers. If managers inherently don't believe in what we're doing, it is a failure point of like significant magnitude. So managers need to be on board with what's happening. And then recruit the right resistance managers. So if you see resistance through different folks, use different people to help with that. Senior leaders for the strategic piece, making sure that they're reinforcing the message that they gave at the kickoff or all hands when it was first discussed. And also supervisors and managers really to be talking about the operational importance of it, so people feel connected to the leadership vision. Other techniques, coaching and manager training for change management, okay? This is stuff that's so important, right? Managers need help getting their team to adopt the changes as well. So give them that support and make sure you're giving your managers enough time to be able to support the change. And so really that's a tough part of the organization, but designating time that they're spending with their teams, they're getting out on the floor, they're troubleshooting issues together, but especially once you go live, it's those first couple weeks where everyone's sort of settling into things, making sure your management team has the space. And training development, develop training program for all levels and training styles, okay? So that becomes important as well. And creating documentation that really speaks to the configuration of the software that you're using, that you can continue to use and maintain. And so a lot of cases, your super users will really leverage that. So lastly, it kind of gets down to the strategy. Okay, so this is a fairly simplistic example of a strategy. So you could call this a work board. Okay, so to the left are all the phases that I introduced early on in the presentation: launch, buy-in, understanding, comprehension, and consistency. To the right of that is the objective for each one of those phases. Okay, so that these objectives could really differ depending on what you as an organization are after. Okay, to the right of that then are the owners. Okay, so who in your organization will lead and who are accountable for this phase of change management. And then lastly, strategies. And strategies really may change. And so this is an exercise that we at GreatVines will take you through and kind of talk through some of the best practices around here. And these are some of the best practices that I've listed here. But the strategy piece is really where most of the work will go through, making sure that you're hitting all of these pieces and getting people to adopt. And change management strategy can really be built into your internal project plan as well. So you're hitting all these milestones as you go. That's all I have for today. Appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care.